So this is the Khoodeelaar television channel, broadcasting under the banner of Baby Angel Geronimo editions at 01:10 hours GMT on Sunday, 16th of July 2023. This is the week that we are observing, the fortnight, let's say, marking the anniversary of the murderous attack on Mr Esmoth Ali and his close relation, Mr Watir Ali. That attack or series of attacks took place in a flat in the Flower and Dean Walk that runs parallel to the Brick Lane. The Brick Lane, a part of the Brick Lane that is situated between the Brick Lane Mosque and where to the south it meets Osborne Street. And that was on the Sunday, the 9th of July, 1989. The murders have not been solved, and the murderers have not been brought to face the consequences of their crimes. Mr. Esmoth Ali and Mr. Watir Ali were among the ordinary people living in their place, and although there was immediate shock and surprise and concern following the murders, and as we have been saying, there was this demonstration that took place on the 15th of July 1989 from the Altab Ali Park to the Bethnal Green Road. I am the one who is continuing the campaign 34 years on. Nobody else has been doing anything. This is not exceptional. This is the norm. For 51 years, let's say, I have been doing this. The solo carrier of the campaign flags and the campaign, if you like, paraphernalia and the campaign demands and the advocacy and the representation and so on. I don't mind doing that, but I have to observe the evidence that the people who claim to be doing campaigns for the community's rights and for justice for those who deserve justice, they are absent. Not only are they absent, but they are indifferent and they are totally in denial, as if these things didn't happen. The attack on Mr. Esmoth Ali and Mr. Watir Ali took place at the same time in the same accommodation, same address. And this happened 11 years after the murderous attack on Altab Ali, of course, on the 4th of May 1978, not far from the Flower and Dean Walk, in fact, a few minutes' walk. And then, not long after that, in July 1978, another Bangladeshi, Mr. Ishaq Ali, was murdered in a street in Hackney. Amazingly, the murder of Mr. Ishaq Ali was not made an issue by the likes of Alok Biswas who later made a lot of claims about them being Hackney Asian Association or Hackney Asian Group or whatever. And they applied for money, received money from the public sources on the alleged ground that they were doing things for the Asian community. But they didn't make any big, in fact, they made no memorable issue about Mr. Ishaq Ali's murder. So on our list currently are Mr. Tosir Ali, who was stabbed to death in Stepney as he almost reached his house after returning from in the kitchen in the Savoy Hotel in the Strand late in the night. So Mr. Ishaq Ali was the one before Mr. Esmoth Ali and Mr. Watir Ali. In between, the murders had been done to perpetrated on Altab Ali. Now, all the claims about the community's response to racist attacks, all the claims, as contained many years later, decades later, by totally corrupt individuals, some of them doing bogus PhD research at various academic institutions, and others doing publications like Olok Bishwas, acted as a ghost for a kind of phantom writer. Now, why do these people do this? The first thing about campaigning against injustice at any level is to tell the truth about the situation. But these people have been doing the opposite. They have been lying. And that undermines, weakens the case for justice. Whether the case is being made for justice in connection with the murders of Mr. Esmoth Ali and Mr. Watir Ali or Mr. Ishaq Ali or Mr. Tosir Ali or Altab Ali. Now, I'm using Mr. before four names, but I'm not using Mr. before Altab Ali's name. Why? Because I knew that Altab Ali was much younger than me when he was murdered. But I don't know, I didn't know the other four. So I cannot treat them as if they were my juniors, if you like, in terms of chronology. So I'm giving them the respectful Mr. to establish that I recognize their position as respectable individuals, worthy of respect and respectful references. Now, I didn't know Mr. Tosir Ali either, but according to the accounts that I heard, Mr. Tosir Ali came from an area not far from my village where I grew up. And that's all I know. I haven't met any of his relations if they are around, and I haven't met any of Mr. Ishaq Ali's relations, and I haven't met any of Mr. Esmoth Ali or Mr. Watir Ali's relations or contacts. So the principle underlying the campaign for justice for these people is the principle that they belong to the same community as I do, and the community is vulnerable to attacks of the description that attaches to each one of these victims, and that racism remains the driving motivation and force behind the United Kingdom state policy, the United Kingdom parliamentary policy, the United Kingdom, quote, establishment policy, the United Kingdom mainstream media policy, the mainstream political parties policy, and of course, the judiciary remains as racist, as ignorant in 2023 as it was when all of these people were murdered by racists. Amazingly, the near murder of Quddus Ali in September 1993, few months after Stephen Lawrence was murdered in Eltham, in the south of London, the near murder of Quddus Ali took place minutes after I had told Quddus Ali, as he was going to the spot where he would be attacked, not to go there. I had no idea about anything that would happen in that way, but I had the feeling that there would be some kind of mischief made against him and the other two of his friends, that the three of them were walking towards Commercial Road minutes before they got attacked. I was in New Road and I was walking down the street to go and meet somebody in Stepney, and I saw them at the corner of Nelson Street and another road that is not far from Commercial Road, it's off the Commercial Road. And I told them, I stopped them. I said, "Where are you going?" And one of them said that we're going to the shop. So they're going to buy or hire or rent some kind of video. And I said, "It's not safe." And one of them, not Quddus, one of them said, "We have knives." I said, "The last thing you should do is to carry knives." And I told them that in any case, you will not be safe with knives either. So don't go there. Of course, I could only tell them. I could not physically stop them going there, and I had no evidence in advance of exact eventualities. I had a feeling, I had a hunch that there would be an attack on them. I had no idea how it came to me, but it did come to me, and I told them. Of course, the campaign, I had to launch the campaign for justice for Quddus Ali as well. So, looking back at the last 51 to 52 calendar years since I have been physically in the United Kingdom in London, the definition in the context of the United Kingdom of a community called the Bangladeshis has been created with references to these campaigns that I have initiated and I have organized. That is the structure, the logistics of the campaigns that together constitute the identity of the Bangladeshis. Because based on those campaigns, the Bangladeshis have become subjects of references, reports in media as well as in public discourse and discussions. So everything that I have been doing, including this broadcast, in this context, is adding to the clarifications of the identity of the Bangladeshis, collectively and in terms of the universally defined rights that we are denied in the context of this community. Now, by this community, I of course refer to the demography of the United Kingdom and the Bangladeshis are part of the other demographies. Others meaning people from other parts of Asian continent, other parts of the African continents. And together, the African people and the Asian people are seen as not European white, although the pigmentation varies and the actual racial origins are, of course, not clear cut. Because the people from African backgrounds are of a different racial backgrounds. People from Asia are, of course, of a similar, comparable racial origin as the European ones. But the pigmentation and the histories and her stories have, of course, produced the cultural separateness and differences that have caused the European ones in Europe to treat the Asian ones as being the other, the other meaning other that can be denied the basic equal human rights. So the racial differences are accentuated and exacerbated by the European ones aiming their hatred and intolerance and hostility against the Asian ones with whom they have more fundamental similarities in racial terms that they do not have with the African ones. But that doesn't justify their hating the African ones any more than they hate the Asian ones or they hate anyone. And the complexities of the hatred directed against people of African and Asian origins based on ethnicities, based on nationalities, state based nationalities, based on the empire and the imperial connections. All of these are dynamic elements and factors that I'm dealing with in this series, and I've been always dealing with, and I've been dealing with more than half a century on board on the soil of the United Kingdom, and I had been doing before I arrived on the soil of the United Kingdom. But that is not the case that can be made about the activities and the attention and the concentrations of the people that claim to be concerned, like the phantom writer Alok বিশ্বাস and his phantom author. These people are parasites that feed off the fruits, the products, the results of other people's work. Other people meaning the likes of me. So, as I said, the campaign for justice for Quddus Ali nearly became a campaign against his racist murder because he nearly died. When I took his pictures while he was in hospital within the minutes of my coming to know about his being attacked. His mother, who is passed now, made it a condition that I should not publish the pictures of him being in that state, and I have not published. I kept my word. Those pictures I took, if ever published, which I don't think I'll ever publish, make him look like he's dead already. That was how badly Quddus Ali was attacked by the racists. And then I had to campaign for the next year for justice for him until he got the large payments, which I don't know how he is spending it. Yeah, he got a significant amount of money, large sum. I have not seen a penny of it, but that is what was one of the consequences. And then I went to various hospitals with him and various events to do with the health and recovery and his care. So when the BBC is in the news this week, and today the Saturday Financial Times has got the item. Saturday's Financial Times has got the item written by 3 writers about the BBC's crisis. One of the writers is, of course, Chris Cook, who has joined the Financial Times after spending a few years at the BBC Newsnight as the policy editor at the BBC Newsnight. And this is the piece that they have written. David Thomas, Oliver Barnes, and Chris Cook. It's a FTB grid. And the main heading is the BBC's never-ending crisis. Now that article takes up most of that page. Underneath that page is, of course, an obituary on the Czechoslovakian writer and thinker Milan Kundera. Now, Milan Kundera was one of the authors and commentators, observers that I had been following right from the 1960s, when he was, of course, mentioned in the news, especially in the news that the Western side, that is the other side of the Iron Curtain, was publishing with glee because Kundera was critical of the then USSR, which had mounted the attack on Czechoslovakia in 1968, when Alexander Dubček was the leading Czech politician. And as a punishment for Alexander Dubček's Prague Spring, the USSR mounted the attack on Czechoslovakia with the USSR tanks rolling down the streets of Prague. I was in then East Pakistan, either in Silot, in my village, or at Dhaka. And I was regularly following the news of events that took place, or was taking place Prague in Czechoslovakia. And Milan Kundera featured as one of the names that occurred in the news. But he wasn't the main name. It was Dubček that was the main name, because Alexander Dubček was given the punishments by the pliant Communist Party regime in Czechoslovakia that actually surrendered to the USSR forces and command. I mean, similar punishments were meted out to Alexander Solzhenitsyn for his opposition to Joseph Stalin and his fascism in Russia itself, in the main USSR center of power. So Milan Kundera came across as one of the very small number of people in the USSR that raised the voice of dissent and dared to criticize the fascist regime that was associated with Stalin and the USSR. But Kundera left Czechoslovakia and became an exile in France. And later on, he took on additionally, the French citizenship. And he wrote in French and he wrote in his own language. And the most noted publication that was associated with him was the translation of his book, which translated the unbearable. What is the name of the book? Let me get it right. I don't want to get it wrong. This is very important. Although I have known about this, I cannot say that I memorize it correctly. It has been 1968 onwards, Kundera has been featuring in the news. Okay, so his biography, his obituary mentions the book, doesn't it? Let me get it. In the Financial Times of Saturday. And this obituary in the Financial Times is quite a competent one, unlike most obituaries that are published about people, because it gives an accurate summary of the main work that Kundera did produce. I'm still looking for that particular title. One heading is absolutely fascinating. It's a poetic heading. It's called A Kidnapped West, The Tragedy of Central Europe. That was published in 1984. That was already kind of published from a safe distance, if you like, because he was comparatively safely settled in France. Now, they talk about his place of birth in the region of Moravia. Now, Moravia, it is a new name that I have come across today in this obituary. I have always associated Moravia with something to do with Italy. Now, they are saying that Moravia, according to them, is of course in Czechoslovakia. This is a piece by, this obituary is written by Tony Barba, one of the names in the Financial Times. So I'm still looking. I don't know in what order this book, the main book, was mentioned in the First reading I did it was during Saturday, and so I'll have to give up the Financial Times and look at the internet for the speed of access to that book. So he died at a mature age, 94, which gave him a lot of space. Yeah, that is the name of the title of the book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's a detailed summary analysis, and so this is a book that is quite significant. The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is, although it's translated into a language that he didn't have as his natural language, but it has the poetic kind of touch. So what Mulan Kundera did was write significant contributions about the future of the world and society in Europe and the future movement for what is called the human rights and against authoritarianism and dictatorship. One of the early ones that I actually came across from Europe when I was still in East Pakistan. Now I'm having to look for Moravia, where Moravia is, because my recollection or understanding of Moravia is associated somehow with Italy. So, where is Moravia? So, I've come to the Moravia entry, and it is in Czechoslovakia. It's not. So, Moravia is in Czechoslovakia. The medieval and early modern Margraviate of Moravia was a crown land of the Bohemian crown from 1348 to 1918, an imperial state of the Holy Roman Empire. So that is the connection with the Rome. From 1004 to 1806, a crown land of the Austrian Empire from 1804 to 1887, and a part of Austria Hungary from 1867 to 1918. Moravia was one of the five lands of Czechoslovakia, founded in 1918. In 1928, it was merged with Czech Silesia and then dissolved in 1948 during the abolition of the land system following the communist coup d'etat. So, my association with Italy is based on Alberto Moravia. Let's check what that means. why I have got that in my head. Alberto Moravia is, of course, Alberto Moravia was an Italian novelist and journalist. So that is the Italian connection in my head. Why was he Italian and why was he called Moravia? Because he wrote against fascism as well. So Alberto Moravia was an anti-fascist as well. And Milan Kundera was born in the Moravia region in Czechoslovakia. Now, these are the names that I was familiar with in the 1960s when I was getting into studying and learning about the world, especially the world in Europe. The world in the USA did not represent intellectually as much as the world in Europe did for two reasons. One was that the Europeans, especially the British, were very recently part of the occupiers of my country. And so I was absolutely determined to find out what they did and how they did it and why they did it and what the people occupied did and so on. In that context, in that quest, I came across Niraj Chaudhary. Now, Niraj Chaudhary was born in Mymensingh, which is in Bangladesh, but being Niraj Chaudhary, whatever, he settled in Kolkata, and my first, one of the first books that I bought in Calcutta was his autobiography of an unknown Indian. And when I read it, I was repulsed. I was absolutely repulsed and disgusted by the intellectual servility and moral gulami on the part of this man who otherwise possessed excellent, excellent knowledge about the British and the English and all the rest of it. And of course, when he died eventually in England, not long before his death, he wrote the book in Bengali, and I remember, if I remember correctly, that book is Attogati Bengali. Now, if Niraj Chaudhary is treated as a template, who would his political example be based on his kind of components? Rishi Sank Sunak would not be far, would he? Because on the news during Saturday, the Ukrainian parasite was popping up in South Korea, where he was being promised 158 million or similar amount of money by this South Korean state leader. How fast can he move? Because it was only few hours previous to that The main news was showing that NATO was not allowing Ukraine to join, and also American president and some European counterparts were not impressed by the parasitical lobbying that the Ukrainian parasite was making for a quick entry into NATO. As I have said before, this is grotesque. I mean, Rishi Sunak behaving like an ape to the political ape to Boris Johnson and asking for more and more support for the Ukrainian war effort. Now, the so called critical private lie, current issue number 1602, dated the 14th of July to the 27th of July 2023, has the cover, and one of the bubbles says that Rishi Sunak is demanding that Biden actually should be paying attention to the case for Ukraine. Now, instead of doing that, he should be talking about peace, not war. And he's not doing anything to do with peace. Now, Neeraj Chaudhary would have done the same thing, I think. Because anyone who, like Neeraj Chaudhary, was as mentally, intellectually servile, the reason why they are so servile is because there is something kind of twisted about the place of morality in their personality, in their outlook. So, for example, the official mental slave, the very dark skinned Trevor Terrible Phillips. Trevor Terrible Phillips condemns black people. That is to say, those black people who oppose racism, who oppose imperialism, who oppose racist injustice, imperialistic legacy of injustice, and so on. There is something wrong because he, being a very black skinned exterior, is only given the platforms that he has been given because the users, his masters and mistresses, can use him as a diversity display, showing to the wider public that black skinned mental slaves like him approve of the racism, approve of the imperialism, which is what explains the entire list of the black skinned conservative MPs and politicos. And anyone who does the same kind of thing with Keir Starmer, the political murderer of the Labour Party, would be classifiable doing the same thing. Now, talking about Milan Kundera, because compared to the bulk or the number, the list of highly regarded intellectuals and commentators, because the Financial Times obituary of Milan Kundera explains that he particularly examined the errors of communism. It's an ideological task that he did well, and he did it firsthand because he, of course, left Czechoslovakia after the Prague Spring was suppressed, and that is direct firsthand experience at the hands of the USSR. Now, if you take any of the examples, I've discussed Nirav Chaudhary, but even Nirav Chaudhary has not been alleged by anyone that I have seen any comments about him making up things. It's one thing to disagree. Making up entire episodes, entire biographical events is something that can only be found in the case of somebody like Abdul Kuffar Chaudhry. Abdul Kuffar recently died. At least I have come across the news that he passed away some time ago. But he was the liar that actually lied, extensively lied about his connection with Sheikh Mujib. I don't call him Bongo Bandhu because I know him as Sheikh Mujib, and that is where the evidence actually dictates and demands that I call him, continue to call him Sheikh Mujib. That is his name. Whoever called him or gave him the name Bongo Bandhu forgot that being a Bengali, I mean, why did he have to be a friend? He was a Bengali himself. So there is this stupidity in the Bongo Bandhu thing. So I'll just mention that. Abdul Kuffar Chaudhry, as I said before, was employed by Ittifaq after Abdul Kuffar Chaudhry was sacked by Akram Khan on the Azad newspaper. Now, in the Azad newspaper, which he was employed to write a piece, a column, he decided, Abdul Kuffar Chaudhry, to attack a very dark skinned Barishal origin man called Professor Akhtar Farooq. Akhtar Farooq was the editor appointed by the Jamaat Islami for their publication called the Daily Sangram. Akhtar Farooq was not a journalist. He was a professor, a teacher, a college teacher of literature. The related discipline would be philosophy and so on. But as an individual scholar, Akhtar Farooq was extremely humorous, and he had the ability to include in his speeches a lot of anecdotes that were readily accessible by the audience. And I said that on the basis of a number of speeches that I attended that Akhtar Farooq gave in Dhaka in public. Whereas Abdul Kuffar Chaudhry didn't have any such quality. Abdul Kuffar Chaudhry was, and I'll come to the reason why I call it Abdul Kuffar. I say it in my Arabic interpretation that he was servile to the kafirs, the collective liars. It's Abdul Kuffar. And my first encounter with him was not personal, it was based on his contributions that were contained in a form that I don't know whether it exists or not. The magazines that contained pornographic pieces would be sold to readers only when they bought the thing. Nobody could actually pick up a copy at the newsstand and look at it. So they would be stapled. The pages would be inaccessible. So I would call him the writer whose work was locked up. In other words, they're locked down. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I was saying it in the 1960s. And the reason why I called him that was because I suspected that the reason why he was being included in the locked up magazines was because he was writing prurient and sub pornographic, if not downright pornographic articles. So he was a writer who had no self esteem. That's how I came across him. Before I came across him as a columnist on the Azad. But when he wrote a piece aimed at Akhtar Farooq, he addressed Akhtar Farooq in the most derogatory way, based on Akhtar Farooq's particularly dark skin. And he called him the dark Munshi or the Khala Munshi. That was very offensive. And he then went on to decry Akhtar Farooq in a most unsubstantiated way. He made a lot of allegations that were not true. Now, Akhtar Farooq, as I said, was a very well read individual. And he had a command of the satire that he could apply quite effectively. Now, Akhtar Farooq wrote a response to Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury's attack on him. And I think the exchange or exchanges continued for a while before Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury was able to negotiate a 50 taka extra payment for his column, and he exited the Daily Azad and got on board the Daily Ittifaq, where he continued to write parasitical pieces. But when the late media tycoon and Muslim League politician from Noakhali, who owned the Purbadesh as a weekly, turned the Purbadesh into a daily newspaper in 1970, the year before Bangladesh became separate from Pakistan. Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury wrote a page one piece in that Purbadesh daily launched by Hamidul Haq Chowdhury, who came from Noakhali, but who was a prominent entrepreneur and prominent activist, political leader for the Muslim League cause that fought for Pakistan. Pakistan, that is the East Pakistan that later became Bangladesh. And in that piece, in January 1970, Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury wrote a highly critical piece about Sheikh Mujib. And he condemned Sheikh Mujib as being autocratic, anti democratic, and the leader of a not decent political party, the Awami League, and words to that effect. That is a column that he wrote. And Hamidullah Chowdhury, being crafty, put that piece on the front page of the Daily Purbadesh for maximum effect, because he knew that this would upset Sheikh Mujib and the Awami League very much. And he was very much against the Awami League and Sheikh Mujib. So Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury took whatever the saying would be, the shillings. Hamidullah Chowdhury was extremely rich. Bangladesh got involved, or East Pakistan become involved as a process, undergoing the process which ended up producing the state of Bangladesh on the 16th of December 1971. Years later, what happens? After Sheikh Mujib is murdered in August 1975, Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury begins to himself as Mujib's main friend, as a consultant. Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury was none of those things. Over 3 years, all the political events, publicly held events of Sheikh Mujib from 1967 up to the end of 1970. Well, up to the 6th of September, let's say, which is when I last saw Sheikh Mujib in person in his house, 32 Dhanmondi. In the claimed pieces of friendship, and made for a living. Sheikh Mujib. Now, going back to the 67 and 1970, the 3 years that I observed Sheikh Mujib politically very closely, I never saw, absolutely never saw Abdul Kuffar Chowdhury anywhere where Sheikh Mujib was. If he was present in the crowd, obviously I missed his presence, but I never noticed him. The only person that I did notice was Tahiruddin Thakur. Now, Tahiruddin Thakur was the liar that actually denied the various journalistic observers, reporters, including me, the opportunity to ask Sheikh Mujib political questions, very significant questions. Tahiruddin Thakur stopped people from asking the questions. And Tahiruddin Thakur imposed himself on Sheikh Mujib as if he was the main consciousness of Sheikh Mujib where these events were concerned. And from those events, I can say confidently that Sheikh Mujib didn't come across as being in charge. And he was, of course, under influence of the likes of Tahiruddin Thakur. Now, I'm talking about the years 1967 to 1970. And what happened? When Sheikh Mujib became the leader of the country after 1970 and 71, and he returned to the country in 1972, he was in post until he was murdered in August 1975. I never saw any of that. And I don't know how many people noticed the extent to which Tahiruddin Thakur got closer and closer and closer to Sheikh Mujib. Because he was not honest about his relationship with Sheikh Mujib. He obviously didn't support Sheikh Mujib, he didn't protect him. In fact, he was one of the people behind the general scheme to murder Sheikh Mujib. Now, why am I saying that? Because when I was trying to find a way to ask Sheikh Mujib any question, which I never was allowed to, because the environment at those events was contaminated by the over influence, over presence of Tahiruddin Thakur ahead of Sheikh Mujib. Like he would be like physically kind of clinging on, almost clinging on to Sheikh Mujib. And I said to people that I knew, I don't remember who I talked to about that, but I said to people in Dhaka, I said, this Tahiruddin Thakur is not helping Sheikh Mujib. Program, which I could never get from platforms, both in Dhaka and elsewhere, mainly in Silot, that I observed fact-based observations were different, because he gave set piece speeches. They didn't actually deal with the real problems of democracy, justice, fairness, human rights, and any of those things, which is what I would have been concerned about asking. And the one thread that I found running through the 3 years that I tried to get a question before Sheikh Mujib was the obstruction personally represented by Tahiruddin Thakur. Now, of course, we don't know, at least as I speak today, I don't know up to this time, if Tahiruddin Thakur ever wrote anything, role that he did play, that I in bringing for corporation. From Tahiruddin Thakur, the reason I am saying this is central to what is happening to Bangladesh. As Milan Kundera is quoted as saying about countries disappearing, I mean, Bangladesh is due for disappearance for environmental reasons because it's one of the environmentally most vulnerable places on earth, according to current scientific observations. So, quite apart from the political, whatever, in uncertainties and political corruption and political unsustainability, the environmental vulnerability will make Bangladesh disappear. Now, who is taking any action if action can prevent the disappearance of Bangladesh environmentally? Whatever Sheikh Hasina is doing, and I spell her name Sikh, S-I-C-K, not S-H-E-I-K-H. Sheikh Hasina is politically sick. She is guilty of not one, hundreds of crimes. And she is not a good thing for Bangladesh. The only reason why she is there is because in the country, politically, there is no real democratic movement, no democratic culture. As one supporter of the Awami League told me some years ago in London, he's a Siloti man, he says, Bhai Sahab, আপনি কইন ডেমোক্রেসি তা গুন্ডা দেশ তো গুন্ডার দল সকল পার্টি হলো গুন্ডা আওয়ামী লীগ গুন্ডা বিএনপি গুন্ডা জামাত ইসলামী গুন্ডা সকলটি গুন্ডা আপনি গুন্ডার দেশও আপনি কিতা ডেমোক্রেসি পাইবা. Now this man was a man working in the minicab company that I used many times during the period. He talked to me about that. And I think he has got a point. Not that I agree with the point. So Sheikh Hasina is there by default. Of course, she is the daughter of Sheikh Mujib. But her name is not Sheikh Hasina. Her name is Mrs. Wazid. But she doesn't use that. Why? I mean, who would listen to her if she calls herself Mrs. Wazid? It's the name of Sheikh Mujib that she's using, and that is an abuse. Now, there is no academic tradition in what is now Bangladesh where the rigor of seeking the truth and seeking the truth and truth alone matters. That doesn't exist. And those academics who are in various positions are there because of their ability to compromise with the liars in the lying regime. That's what is happening. The culture is totally corrupt, absolutely corrupt, utterly corrupt. And those who act as Sheikh Hasina's agents among the Bangladeshis abroad, like in Tower Hamlets, are obstructing the UK Bangladeshis movement towards a determined, rigorously campaigning, responsible community that can have reliable representation for defending human rights and the values that make our people stand up for rights as compared with other people of other backgrounds, which is where Esmoth Ali's case, the case for Watir Ali, case for Ishaq Ali, case for Tosir Ali come in. I have been asking, I'm not naming anyone here, but I've been asking people who have been councillors in Armed Council, say during the period 1990 up to, let's say, the following few years, what, as councillors, what action did they take? Because Mr Esmoth Ali and his relative Watir Ali were murdered in July 1989. Well, Watir Ali died a bit later, but he died of the same attack. Injuries he sustained at the same attack. So, for simplicity and accuracy as well, this is the same attack, let's say. So, they were attacked in 1989. And the Committee for Bangladeshis Rights in the United Kingdom, whose constitution I wrote and whose name I chose, and which was supported by representatives who attended the founding meeting on the 31st of July 1989 at the Barner Centre of the Cannon Street Road, agreed with everything that I proposed. And there were representatives of more than 100 organizations. Where are they? Why did in the meeting with the campaign for justice for Mr. Watir Ali, Mr. Esmoth Ali, Mr. Ishaq Ali, Mr. Tosir Ali, and of course, because of the amount of attention that has been of the four, I say the campaign I to build the campaign have have gone south. Welfare Association and promises that are there in the name of Bangladesh Welfare Association are not in the hands of the community. The money that the Bangladesh Welfare Association was given has never been accounted in the United Kingdom doesn't seek any money, has never done that. And if anyone ever says that they are seeking money for the CBRUK, let me go on the record again here. I'm the founder chair as well, and I'm the chief executive of this CBRUK. And there is no not even a bank account for this organization. To update and add any topical updater component.